mission trip, immersion experience. And I did want to share that with you a little bit today because it really does tie into what we're looking at as outreach here. So I want to share this a little bit with you this morning as part of my presentation. Just kind of what I experienced, what I went through, what I saw, and try to get a little bit with what I learned. I still don't know everything that I learned yet from that week. It was a very intense week. There was a lot of stuff that we did, that we participated in, that we talked about, that it's going to take a long time for me to process and try to figure out. First of all, that's our group. Good looking group of people right there. Had a wonderful time with these guys. There's me, right? There's my mug right there. That's me, yep. This is Doug. He was our from Sioux Seminary. He was one of our leaders. Casey, down here, he is in charge of an organization called Wiconi International. Wiconi means life. And it was an organization that was founded several years ago as an effort to kind of bridge the gap between what is seen as white European Christianity and Native America. And there is a gap, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. But this was just a wonderful, incredibly loving group of people that I got to spend a week with. And even though it was just a week, I really miss these guys. There were some really awesome people that I got to spend some time with. I know this map is small, but just to kind of give you an idea as to where we were. Where did the mouse go? There it is. The Rosebud Reservation is this one right here. If you look, it's this kind of the purple. That purple square sort of down at the very southern edge of South Dakota, right smack dab in the middle. That's where we were for the week. Here's a little bit closer in map, if you look. If you've ever been driving on I-90 across South Dakota, this is Chamberlain. This is where I-90 crosses over the Missouri. Here's Peter, state capital. Down here is Mission, South Dakota. That's the town that we stayed in for the week that we were there. St. Francis, we drove through there. I think we were lost one time when we did that. The city of Rosebud is right about there, where that is. And I mentioned that because I have a little story from one of our trips to the city of Rosebud. So I'm just going to kind of go over a little bit of what we did. When we were there, we were all told to keep a journal of our activities. And so this is my journal. If you ever were to look at it, I would consider sharing it with you. But if you ever try to read it, by the Thursday night that I was writing stuff, the last night that we were there, the words were kind of, they weren't really words anymore. I was so tired and burnt out and everything. I was missing letters. And I've had to go back and scratch out some things and correct a few things. But it was a really, really good time. It's tough to sleep when you're 6'2" and the bed is 6 feet long and you're and a footboard there. But it was a wonderful time. The biggest thing that we looked at from the very first night was this was not a mission trip. We weren't there as missionaries. We weren't there to build a church. We weren't there to paint a house. We weren't there to, quote unquote, save the Indians. Our job there was as an immersion experience, is how they called us. So our job was to go down there and to learn, to experience the culture, to experience exactly what was going on, and just to try and figure out a little bit better how we can connect to Native Americans and to try to figure out where those differences come in. So we started out Saturday from Sioux Falls. When we left, I drove my car, my little Pontiac Grand Am, made it all the way to Rosebud and to Pine Ridge and to Wounded Knee and all the way back. And I was very proud of the little car, for being honest with you, the little guy. When we were driving out there, it was making some kind of a weird noise, some weird vibrating noise. Something was loose and we couldn't figure out what it was. So Casey, who I pointed out on that picture a little bit ago, we decided to stop and we popped the hood to try to see if there was anything loose, and nothing was loose, so we kept driving and the noise kept going. And Jessie, she was in the front seat. She was determined to figure out what this noise was because it was so obnoxious. We couldn't talk, we couldn't do anything. So she starts feeling the ceiling and said, I think it's something up here. So we stopped at a stoplight out in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. They were doing some road construction, so they had a couple stoplights there to direct traffic. So when we stopped at the stoplight, she hops out of the car and she notices that the seal at the top of the windshield is loose. And that's what's making the buzzing noise. It's like, I can fix that. So we pull over, grab my first aid kit, grab some medical tape out of the first aid kit, and tape the heck out of that. And it fixed it. It was great. And I think there was a lesson in there said this right away because Casey and I got out of the car. We popped the hood, you know, and we're looking down in the hood, and we don't see anything. Everything's looking fine. And then Jessie figures out. She looks up and figures out the problem. So I think there's a lesson in there, not looking down, but looking up.
That's a stretch.
Hey, I'm the guy telling the story. So Saturday night we went to a powwow that was out there. I'd never been to a powwow before. This was a really amazing experience for me. It was a really cool thing to see. I didn't know anything going in. They didn't tell us anything about it. We just went and experienced it. One of the big things that I noticed while I was there was as the drum groups were playing and singing, the biggest thing I noticed was the dancers' feet. It was really fascinating to watch. Every single step was so deliberate and just so amazing and so precise. Afterwards, Barry, who is Kiowa out of Oklahoma, he's one of the guys on our group with us, he was talking about it that night, that every step in these dances is a prayer. And so it makes a lot more sense when you think about that when we pray, we're very intense about the way we pray. And if every step in these dances is a prayer, of course it's going to be precise, and of course it's going to be very intense. Sunday, just going kind of timeline here, because that's how I wrote my journal, that's how I remember everything. So Sunday morning we got up and we had breakfast, and Doug said, okay, here's a list of churches around the area, go to one. Right? Get in groups of 2 or 3 and go to a church. Well, a couple of the guys that were sitting at my table wanted to go to the Catholic church in Rosebud. Like, I grew up Catholic, I wasn't real excited to go to a Catholic mass, but I'm like, okay, I'll go with you guys. So I plug it into the GPS on my Google phone, and Google takes me to a church right in the middle of Rosebud, which was not the Catholic church in Rosebud. It took us right to the very old Catholic church in Rosebud. So we drove about a block and we went down the street to a gas station. And Stephen hops out of the car and goes to the gas station and says, hey, do you know where the Catholic church is? Do you know where St. Bridget's Catholic church is? And the clerk said, no, I don't, but there's a woman using the restroom right now. When she comes out, she might be able to tell you. So she comes out of the restroom and says, hey, do you know where St. Bridget's Catholic church is? She goes, oh yeah, I'm going there. You can follow me. Just one of those really awesome, God wants us to do this moments. You know, it's just like, of all the places we could have stopped, all the people we could have met, of the 20 or so people that were going to this mass that morning, we just happened to run into it at this gas station. So it was really interesting. A couple of big differences with the Catholic mass there as opposed to if you went to St. Anthony's here in Florida, at least from what I remember growing up. First of all, they didn't have any piano or organ music. They had a man playing a native flute, which was very beautiful to listen to. A lot of the prayer in Catholic masses is kind of in a sing-songy fashion. There wasn't any of that. The prayers were there, but they were simply spoken. So it kind of took that European singing aspect out of the mass, and they kept the prayer in it, but they took the other aspect away from it, just to kind of make it a little bit more, I don't want to say palatable, but a little bit more, you guys know.
Natural.
Natural, yes. I'm so glad I prepared for this morning. So afterwards, they had a breakfast actually, so we had 2 breakfasts that morning. Both of them were biscuits and gravy. I was starting to think that that's all we were going to eat that week was biscuits and gravy, which would have been fine because they were delicious. Would have been great. Monday morning started out, we had a couple speakers on Monday. Lynette Whitehat was our speaker. There were a few things from what she said that really stuck out to me. One of the big things that she talked about was the alcohol problem on Rosebud. And on many reservations, unfortunately, the alcoholism rate there is about 40%. 40% are alcoholics. And then she went on to say that the methamphetamine problem is actually worse right now on Rosebud. Because of the fact that there's 2 main highways that go through the Rosebud Reservation, it is a pipeline for drugs coming into the Dakotas and all over the place. She was also talking about how many of the houses there are government-owned. They're Bureau of Indian Affairs owned. So they go into these homes, they test for methamphetamine. If they find traces of methamphetamine, they kick the people out, they board up the houses, and they clean it up. So they're basically kicking people out of these houses So there's people that are losing their homes, going to live with other people. And we started noticing that we'd go down the street and there'd be 5 houses there, 3 of them would be boarded up. Whether they were from methamphetamine or from something else we didn't know, but just knowing that meth is such a huge problem there and seeing boarded up house after boarded up house was really just a very sad thing to see. Lynette also spoke a little bit of boarding schools. I don't know if anyone's very familiar with the history of Indian boarding schools in this country. It's a really terrible, terrible history to look at. She was talking about, I believe it was her grandmother, she mentioned. And grandma was missing 2 fingers. Missing the tips of a couple of her fingers. They never knew why. And then finally they found out that when grandma was in boarding school, she was told, you cannot speak a single word of Lakota. If you speak any Lakota, you will be punished. Grandma spoke 2 words of Lakota. Grandma lost 2 fingers. These are common things when you start looking into this. I'm almost frightened to do any more looking into the boarding schools, knowing the terrible, terrible history of what happened. The whole purpose of these boarding schools was to take the Indian out of the person. That was kind of the stated goal of the boarding schools over the years. Just a terrible, terrible period of our history. That evening we had another speaker, Shane Redhawk, came in. Shane was not a Christian. He was very much the native Lakota religion. It's very interesting to listen to him talk. He talked a lot about his ancestors and how the spirits are always around him. He talked about a trip that he took to New York where his grandmother and grandfather were there with him. They passed away years ago, but they were there with him. And to somebody like me, it's really tough to kind of wrap my head around this and to understand it. But the way Shane spoke, he spoke with such authority. And this wasn't a crazy guy by any means. There was nothing weird about him at all. He absolutely experienced these things. And I don't know how to process that personally. It's just a very different experience from anything that I've ever seen in my life. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is just kind of me sharing. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm not saying it's incorrect. I just want to share these things with you guys, just to kind of let you know my experiences that I had while I was down at Rosebud. Tuesday was a pretty neat day. To me, it was probably the most significant day that we had out there. We started off in the morning with a panel of our leaders, and they talked about a lot of different things in terms of the idea of contextualization, the idea of bringing Christianity to Native American culture. So that was a really neat session. That afternoon, we went to some Sundance grounds, and RJ, who it was his Sundance grounds, his family's, talked a little bit about it. And before we left, Kate mentioned to me to make sure that I use all my senses when I go on this trip. And not to just see things, but to listen to things, and to smell things, and to feel things. And I just want to share something with you that I heard while I was there. While we were standing there, RJ was telling us a little bit about the ceremony of the Sundance. And at one point, he started talking about all of the pollution and the things that we're doing to Earth at this time. And as he's talking about the pollution, I start hearing 2 birds talk to each other. Okay? A couple minutes later, he started talking about that pollution again, and those same 2 birds started talking to one another. Okay? So I thought, I'm going to open my ears a little bit. I'm going to see what else I can notice as we talk. A little while later, he started talking about the cottonwood tree. They use a cottonwood tree in this ceremony. And they use it because when they cut it down, a great amount of water rushes out, and it's believed that it's the same amount of water that's in the human body. And as he's talking about when they cut down the tree and those water rushes out, the wind picked up in the background. It didn't pick up where we were, but it picked up kind of off in the distance. And as it blew through the trees and it rustled the leaves, it sounded exactly like a rushing waterfall, right as he was talking about this. A little bit later, he started talking about energy, about how much energy is in the ceremony. And as he was talking about energy, I started hearing the cicadas start chirping. And if you've ever heard cicadas chirping, to me at least, it sounds kind of like high voltage power lines buzzing. So as he's talking about energy, I'm hearing cicadas create this sound that to me sounds like energy. A little while later, he started talking about energy again, and I thought to myself, I wonder if the cicadas are going to start chirping again. Sure enough, cicadas started chirping. So those are just a few things that I experienced. Not saying that this was some grand thing that God gave us through His creation. I honestly don't know. but it's something I just wanted to share with you guys that I experienced, that I saw, and that I heard and felt when we were there. That was just kind of an interesting experience for us. Tuesday evening, we went to a church called the Carpenter House Church. Carpenter House Church is a church that was founded on the Rosebud Reservation. This was probably the most amazing, purest form of worship I have ever experienced. It really was. We got there a little bit after 7, and we started singing and dancing and clapping and laughing and crying. People shared their testimonies, and that went on for 2 hours. And then we started worship. We were there that night for over 3 hours, just in this amazing form of worship and fellowship. And it was just the greatest experience that I've had. You could feel the Holy Spirit there that night. You absolutely could. It was just an amazing, amazing time. Wednesday afternoon, we did have the opportunity to participate in a sweat. People refer to it as a sweat lodge. I did go. I did participate for a little bit. For me, it wasn't a pleasant experience, to be perfectly honest with you. I didn't like it very much. A lot of the people that did it got a lot out of it. It was far more uncomfortable for me than I ever thought it would be. But it's, it is what it was. I was very honored to be able to do it. It was wonderful. Like I said, I didn't get too much out of it. I just wanted to leave basically as soon as we started, because it was far hotter, far more humid, far more uncomfortable than I ever thought it would be. But that was my experience. A lot of the other people made it through the whole thing and just had a really good time. So it was a very interesting experience, and I was very happy to be a part of it. Tuesday night, we had probably our greatest form of worship. Wednesday night, we probably had our greatest time of fellowship as a group. We all sat around they had a big commons area, and we all sat around and popped some popcorn and watched the greatest movie of all time, which of course is Sharknado. Terrible movie. Terrible movie. Barry, one of the guys on the trip, provided commentary throughout the entire movie, which was what made the experience wonderful. If you've ever seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, that's basically what we got to experience when we watched Sharknado. So if you don't have somebody to Mystery Science Theater 3000 Sharknado up a little bit, don't want to watch it. Thursday was kind of an out-of-town day for us. Went out to the Wounded Knee Massacre site. It's a very simple memorial. It seems very fitting for what happened there, but it's a very simple memorial in this cemetery out there. The mass grave at that cemetery, I believe, had 150 people buried in it, something along those lines. Reports from Wounded Knee from the massacre, anywhere from 190 to 300 people were killed at this site. If you want to know any more of the history of it, you can ask me or go ahead and just look it up on Google. Really a terrible thing that happened there as well. After that, we went to the Red Cloud School. The whole time that we were there, we did something every morning called smudging. And what smudging is you take sage. We picked some sage. Thursday on our way back, everybody was always kind of looking for some sage as we were going. And as we were looking for sage, I'm like, oh, there's some sage. I'm like, I'm going 65 miles an hour, guys. I can't stop right now. So we finally pull up, and we're like, okay, that field probably has some sage in it. So we stop, and Nicole, one of the girls that was riding with me the whole week, she's a rancher, so she just walks up to this fence, pulls some handle, and the whole thing falls down. Like, I have no idea what was going on there. I was like, all right, let's go trespass. That's all good. So we go out, and we all pick some sage. As part of the tradition, we also left some tobacco as an offering back to the earth, just as a respect thing that we had. But every morning what you do is, if you'd like, I can pass this around if you want to smell it. It smells very beautiful. Every morning we did what's called smudging. It's essentially like burning incense. It's burnt in a turtle shell or an abalone shell, I don't recall what, but it's burned, and then you kind of take the smoke in and envelop it around you. Take it in kind of as the Spirit of God. It's a very interesting experience. And so, of course, we had to bring some sage back with us. And as we went out into this field, somebody said, hey, can there be rattlesnakes here? And they're like, oh yeah, there could be rattlesnakes here. And I was on my way back to the car. City boy wearing tennis shoes and shorts isn't going to hunt out rattlesnakes for too terribly long. But it was a really wonderful experience. We did get our sage that we were able to bring back. And as the week went on, as The first couple of days, sage has a very sweet smell. My connection to that the first couple of days was a Pink Floyd concert. It kind of smelled like a Pink Floyd concert, if you know what I mean. But as the week went on, it was just very much a very nice, soothing, comforting smell as we went through the week. I think that smell will forever be associated to me with the week that we spent at Rosebud. And then Friday was simply our trip back to Sioux Falls. So the whole reason, like I said, for this immersion experience was to try to connect and to try to get us to understand that we have our way of worshiping Christ that we have brought about over the years. Other cultures, other people can also have their way of worshiping Christ. Richard Twist was one of the men who founded this immersion experience. He unfortunately passed away about 4 years ago. This is one of the books he wrote, Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys. He wrote this, I believe this was his doctoral dissertation. There's a lot of really big fancy words in there that I don't understand and probably never will. So it's a wonderful book though. He did a wonderful job writing it, and it's just a good thing to read. One of the quotes that I wanted to share with you guys. Richard says, in contextual gatherings, though specifically organized for the native person, ours wasn't designed for Native Americans, ours was designed for white guys like me to go out and experience this. But he says, in contextual gatherings, non-native believers find themselves equally encouraged and strengthened spiritually. Old fears are dispelled, and new understandings open their hearts to the life of Jesus in ways previously rejected. These gatherings result in all people experiencing a revitalized sense of faith and worship because of the cross-cultural influences of those involved. I read the last 2 chapters of this book when I got back from immersion, and this was one of the quotes that I read, and I could not agree more with the statement that he made. It was truly an amazing experience to learn and to grow. Since we've been talking a little bit about outreach to each other here, just to discuss very briefly some of the barriers reaching out specifically to Native Americans that we discussed in our time at Rosebud. We have to understand the history. The history that occurred is still very alive to them. You know, we look at this and we see, okay, well, you know, they were put on reservations back in the 19th century. What does that have to do with today? Well, there's a great connection to ancestry in many Native American religions. So we have to understand that. We have to understand that all the broken treaties that took place, these are still things that are very, very alive to many people today. I mentioned briefly boarding schools. I mentioned the fingers being cut off. There are numerous stories of children being beaten for speaking one word of their native language. Just imagine if your kids are taken from you, from some other group. The only language they've ever spoken is English. They're put in a school. They're told to grow their hair really, really long. They're told you can only speak this other language, and if you speak English, we're going to cut off a finger. Could you imagine that at this point if someone did that to your children? That's exactly what was done in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There were some other, in one of the other books that I read, they talked about one of the other punishments was they would put a broom handle on the ground and they would have the child kneel on that broom handle. So all of the weight from the knees up was down on that broom handle. There was another description in this book that they would do the same thing but with marbles instead of a broom handle. Some terrible, terrible things. And the sad thing is all these boarding schools were Christian run. So when we look at this, this wasn't the government coming in. This wasn't people coming in doing these things. Sadly, to them, this was the Christian God coming in and doing these things. It was the Christian God that was cutting off people's fingers. It was the Christian God that was beating children. It was the Christian God that was doing far worse things to these children. And that's something that we have to deal with. The whole effort of these boarding schools was to take the Indian out of the person, to quote-unquote civilize them. So again, we got to look at this in perspective. So it was that Christian God that brought this oppression to the people. So how are we to describe to them, to be able to tell them that it wasn't God that did these things? It was humanity. It was humanity in our own fallen state that did this. we made the mistake, it wasn't God. It's a tough thing to convince people of. And it might be the truth to you and me, but to some people that have seen some terrible things and have had horrible things happen to them it's not me, it's not you, it was God that did those terrible things. Just a couple of other really quick questions to ponder as you go forward. And I don't have answers to these. I'll be perfectly honest, I'm still trying to figure these things out. Are Native American cultural practices incompatible or even dangerous to Christian worship? And the things I'm talking about are things like smudging, powwows, sweats. Are those things so incompatible to Christian worship that we have to eliminate them from Native American Christian practices? It's a question that has to be answered. The other big question to answer is our version of prayer and worship. What we're doing here this morning, what we're doing right now, is our version of prayer and worship the only right one?
No.
We're all Christians. Catholics have a very different method of worship than we do. Lutherans have a very different method of worship than we do. So, what's right? That's a big question that we have to answer. Just a couple of kind of closing thoughts for you guys on this part. And then maybe we'll go eat. I guess you guys are getting kind of hungry. Just a few things that I wanted to share with you. This trip for me was a very, very reaffirming time. I've always had a lot of questions about whether or not I was on the right path, about whether or not I understood what God wanted me to do by going to seminary and by following this. I absolutely believe, after meeting this group of people, that I am on the right path.
Amen.
This was a really great thing to understand. I'm the guy that grew up, I've said this before, I grew up watching Beavis and Butthead, I grew up watching South Park, I grew up listening to Metallica. I always thought that first day of seminary I would show up, and I'd pull up and there'd be somebody in the car next to me cranking the old Rugged Cross, and I'd be listening to Pantera and Black Sabbath, and I wouldn't fit in. Then I met this group of people right here, and they're all crazy weird in their own unique ways, and that's what makes them so awesome to be around. I think God also kind of narrowed down my focus in terms of what type of ministry I should do. I will not be a suit and tie pastor. I don't see that in my future. I look good in a suit and tie, don't get me wrong. But I don't think that's really what's in it for me. I think my outreach is going to be to the Metallica people, to the South Park people, to kind of those guys that don't get ministered to right now. These are a lot of those things that I thought about when I was there. I thought a lot about contextualization, this idea of does smudging fit into Christian worship? Well, what about Christmas trees? What do Christmas trees have to do with the birth of Christ? Yet if we didn't have a Christmas tree in here on Christmas, people would freak out.
Amen.
One thing that I noticed several years ago, and it bothered me when I saw it, and I think it bothers me even more today. I walked into Hurley's Religious Goods quite a few years ago. When we were growing up, our family would always go there around Christmas time, and we would buy a little nativity scene figure, so we built our nativity scene up as we were growing up. And so years ago, I just decided to walk in, and I walked in, and what was sitting right there on an end cap, there was a statue. It was a statue of little baby Jesus in a manger with Santa Claus praying over him. And I looked at this and I'm like, why are we saying Santa was at the birth of Jesus? And I just asked this. And if we can start to say Santa was at the birth of Jesus, why can we not say there can be such a thing as a Christian powwow? What is the problem with that? We have a couple minutes left here. What I would like to do is I would like to end before we do our last sign and everything, I would actually like to end the way we started this morning. I would like to take another 10 minutes of silent prayer, silent reflection time. Again, cell phones, anything like that, if you could turn them off, we'll just be quiet. If the kids get fussy or anything, if you could just step out with them for just a couple of minutes. If you can't, not chase Pokemon for the next 10 minutes. If you want to go run around outside, that's quite all right. But I do want to go for the next 10 minutes or so with that. And I'll go ahead and read that psalm one more time for you.